Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hellstorm. Vic Gatto, your host. Today I have Samar Ali on with me. She's a great guest. She's a lawyer, mediator, entrepreneur, strategist, done a ton of things in her career. We dig into the COVID virus, which of course is going around the country right now, but also how we deal with social media, how politics in this country need to be changed. We talk about the Syria crisis. It's a great show, lots of different topics, really wide-ranging, a lot of fun. Please watch it. Thanks very much. This is Vic Gatto with the Hellstorm. Samar Ali, thanks for joining to the Hellstorm in kind of interesting times. We're now virtual, but thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start off. Give the audience a quick summary of your background. You've done lots of things, starting as a White House fellow, an attorney. You teach law, lots of things. How do you describe your background?
Yes, I work at the intersection of three different disciplines, national security being one, economic development being the second, and the third being human rights, civil rights, depending on where you are. People call it different things. And so I have been doing that for a little over 10 years now. I went to Vanderbilt undergrad, Vanderbilt Law School. I'm originally from Tennessee, from a small town. From a very early age, my parents being first generation immigrants from the Middle East, I was raised bicultural and always international bug in me, if you will, and always knew I wanted to be an international practitioner. And that's what I focused on in undergrad and focused on in law school. And then went and lived in South Africa for a while, and also then clerked as a lawyer after graduating from law school, and worked in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer and helped the law firm that I worked for at the time, Hogan Lovells, set up an office in the Middle East. It was based in the United Arab Emirates. And now I did all of that, and I was really my focus was on cross-border transactions as a corporate attorney and as an international corporate attorney. And then I started working. I applied for the White House Fellowship, was very lucky and surprised that I got the White House Fellowship. It's usually a mid-career program, and I started that in my late 20s in the Obama administration, and my portfolio was primarily focused on national security, including homeland security. And then I moved back to Tennessee after all of those different world travels and experiences. I decided to move back home and have Tennessee be back because it is my home base. And I started working for Governor Haslam for a while as his assistant commissioner for economic and community development, particularly focusing on our international platform in Tennessee, including for creating jobs, increasing trade, both inbound and outbound investments. So the foreign direct investments that we see from companies like Hankook, for example, and Bridgestone, those are some of the, that's an example of foreign direct investment.
That was a big piece of Governor Haslam's effort to bring foreign direct investment in.
Yes, exactly. And also to increase exports from Tennessee companies. Because 45% of Tennessee's economy is dependent on the global marketplace. So almost 1 in 2 jobs in Tennessee depends on international trade. And our dependency and our global connectivity is more relevant by the day. And for the state's economy, particularly because of where we're situated. And Tennessee is within 24 hours drive of 75% of the country's population. So we're geographic, why we have FedEx in Memphis and et cetera. So did that. And so worked in government, worked outside of government, then worked as a third-party mediator for several years to the Syrian conflict. That was a very difficult time period, which is a longer conversation, but really A lot of my training in up until that point, and particularly when I was in South Africa, was on conflict resolution, mediation work, and how you bridge divides and bridge differences, which is one of the reasons I work at the intersection that I do in those three different disciplines that I spoke about earlier. And I did a lot of that work as a lawyer at Bass, Berry & Sims through two different clients, actually, and one in particular that has an agreement with the United Nations. And so through that avenue was where my work on Syria came through. And at Bass, Berry & Sims today, I'm still a lawyer there. I'm an international counsel. I'm helping set up a cybersecurity practice at Bass, also working on cross-border transactions, and still mediating different conflicts when asked to and when it makes sense. And as an entrepreneur, I helped found Lodestone Advisory Group. As a social entrepreneur, helped start Millions of Conversations campaign.
Yeah.
And then as an academic, I teach a number of different courses at Vanderbilt Law School.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know how you have time to sleep. You do a lot of different things. So,
yeah, it all connects.
I'd really like to dig into the Millions of Conversations because, first of all, I want to have you talk about what it is. But I feel like with the amount of social media and internet and mobile, this always like 24-hour news cycle, we have a lot more news and media kind of targeted at us or thrown at us all the time. But I feel like we get less useful information. There's less discussion than there used to be. And I'm interested in you describing Millions of Conversations, like what it is. And do you see that trend or how would you position that?
Yeah, I mean, so let me just start with what Millions of Conversations is. It's a campaign that transcends divides by bringing Americans together around commonly shared values. In a way, it's an initiative to renew our social contract with each other so that we can be successful together, so that we can move forward together in a healthy, safe, and productive way, online and offline. As we've seen over the past 2 weeks, we're all really adjusting to how we engage in one-on-one interactions and group interactions online. We know that online communications have been used to drive fear, and that they have been used also, quite frankly, to radicalize people. And create extremes and extreme divisions. What we haven't seen a lot of yet is using online platforms to bring people together and to build sustainable connectivity that is rooted in empathy for each other. And that's what we really do need to get to as a society. And so Millions of Conversations is focused on transcending these divides, online and offline, and between each other. So we really do three key things. And what I will say is that before I say what those three key things are, just to kind of put it in context, we're in the middle of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. And the World Economic Forum talks about this often, which is that we are in this transition period. Whenever you're transitioning into a new period, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of turmoil, and unfortunately, in moments there's a lot of violence. And so what we have to do is create mechanisms that help us to weather the storm so that we come out of it stronger rather than weaker. And so Millions of Conversations is one of those mechanisms that we have created in order to do exactly that.
Yeah,
and to
so
create
the internet or a social media platform or whatever, Zoom that we're using right now, it is a tool, right? It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, it can be used for neutral things. It can be used lots of different ways, but it has to be we need to start using these tools to drive empathy more, or to
That's
have
right.
more deep.
That's right. We have to drive them. We have to put money behind them, and we have to put focused energy strategically behind them so that we actually are coming together in productive, peaceful, and inclusive ways, rather than violent and divisive ways that does not lead to productivity and does not lead to success.
Yeah.
So one of the top national security concerns right now amongst national security experts in the United States is the growing polarization in the United States.
Right.
And we have to understand that if we want to continue to be strong, if we want to continue to be productive, if we want to continue to be innovative, we have to work together. We really don't have a choice. If we're going to focus all of our energy and our time fighting with each other and on infighting, we're all going to lose.
Yeah.
And
because I'm interested in health. I feel like health is one of the big things that the society is always wrestling with. It's been one of the top issues in the last 8 presidential elections, maybe the top issue, but one of the top issues. And because of that position, it gets utilized and bandied about for political purposes or for special interest purposes in a way that is negative to sort of the underlying thing, which is everyone deserves strong public health, strong health, access to health care, and we have to pay for it in a way that is sustainable so that our grandparents can get care and our grandchildren can get care.
I was saying, we have to go back to basics. And so what are our values? What are our common core values that we care about as a nation? Is the healthcare of our society one of them? What's happening is everything has been politicized. So we are in a constant election cycle with politicians who are running zero-sum campaigns, which is like the winner does take all. So when you're running a campaign like that, there is no such thing in that moment as compromise. So
what I find is I don't think that our political leaders are actually leading anywhere. They're sort of taking polls and then trying to figure out what will score the most debate points, as opposed to
that's right. But in a democracy, how it's supposed to work is that the way that because that's what politicians are going to do. That's what we've incentivized them to do. So I'm not necessarily faulting them for that. They're actually acting rationally, believe it or not. That is actually rational behavior when you're running for office.
Yeah.
But what we're not doing effectively is holding politicians accountable and making sure that we are asking the right questions, and that if and then part of that is because of how we're receiving information and et cetera, and the role of disinformation campaigns and misinformation campaigns, which I was going to talk a little bit about in a minute, about what Millions of Conversations is doing about that. And so the issues are becoming extremely politicized, and they're being packaged in sometimes disinformation campaigns and sometimes in misinformation campaigns that create a sort of tribalism.
For me, maybe the audience knows, maybe they don't. Disinformation versus misinformation. What's the difference between those?
It's the intent. It gets to the intent. Okay. Misinformation is you're sharing information that you think is true, but it's not. Yeah. But you're not doing it on purpose. But you're sharing it. We saw that a lot last week when there was a text message that was going around. Somebody said that a family member worked for Homeland Security and the entire nation was going to be shut down within 48 hours. Lots of people got that text, and a lot of people asked me, is this true? They were sending it not because they were trying to start a disinformation campaign, but they were sharing misinformation. They didn't know they weren't sharing. They didn't know they were sharing.
Game of telephone, a rumor or something like.
Exactly, that's misinformation. Disinformation is purposefully putting out false information for nefarious intent.
Yeah. And then how would you categorize like a sales-related content, which you might put your best features forward and not necessarily discuss in a commercial or a marketing effort all the weaknesses?
Right. Right. Or you can, I mean, so like, or if you, this is happening actually. I mean, if you're a group that's a terrorist organization and you want to right now have a bio attack on a particular community, and you know that that community is very vulnerable to disinformation, you might tell them that you might purposefully start a disinformation campaign that says, if you drink this formula, you will be cured. And that's all you have to do, and you don't have to go to the hospital. That is a purposeful, purposefully designed disinformation campaign. Or if you want to character assassinate somebody, if you want to assassinate someone's character, you would make up all the stuff about them, you'd put a lot of funding behind it, and you would lodge all of this disinformation and focus it on that particular person saying that they did this, they did that, they did all of these different things which aren't true, and then you have the person on the retreating, trying to explain, and then gets a successful disinformation campaign.
Right. Okay. Okay. So how does Millions of Organizations combat this?
Yeah. So
I see that all over the place, and it's depressing how prevalent it is.
Yeah. So 3 key things. First of all, we are countering disinformation and misinformation campaigns, online and offline. So I'm just going to kind of give the headlines, and I'll tell you how we're doing.
Yeah.
Second thing we're doing is we're disrupting cycles of fear, hate, and violence. Let me just talk for a moment about how that works. And this is why the disinformation and the misinformation campaigns are so important to understand. It starts with labeling of the other. You label somebody as the other, as an outsider, that's dangerous. You label them that way. So you start with labeling of the other, and that leads to building animosity against that other which you've labeled. That animosity then turns to blame. You start blaming the other for all your problems, okay? So then that turns into fear. So human beings begin to fear the other because the other is the enemy. And that fear then hardens to hate, and then the hate in some circumstances, depending on who is being targeted, can harden into violence. So what we look to do is to disrupt those cycles of fear, hate, and violence, starting with changing and challenging the narrative that demonizes the other. And so it's all connected for us, that third piece of challenging, demonizing narratives of the other. And so how we do it is by a number of different programs, but one is offline dialogue sessions with people who we know are sympathetic and vulnerable to extremist messaging against the other, and then online engagement, which is really meant to be entertaining in nature, because people do, as human beings, want to be entertained. And that's to build on what we just talked about at the beginning of this conversation, is to build empathy online. And so that when the person leaves the offline engagement with another person that they view initially as the enemy, and I'm going to give you a very specific example, they view as the enemy, when they then go online, so that they don't go back into their echo chamber, they're then receiving information and media that's reinforcing the good-natured feelings and the common values that they initially connected around in their offline interaction. And so that's how you're going to move people from negative to neutral, neutral positive with someone that initially they might think, not only do they not have anything in common with, that they think is the source of all their problems. So I'll give you a very quick example. We were doing some research around this, and we had engaged 10 different people in a room talking about this, and they were part of a focus group, everybody in the room was talking about how they feared Muslims. And as you know, I'm an Arab American Muslim, and the facilitator decided to have me join the group. And at the end of the conversation with them, he asked if they were comfortable with meeting me. And I walked in to their meeting, and one woman, and I said, I understand you fear my religion. And one woman said, I don't just fear your religion, I fear you. And I said, yes, you fear me. And it's taking you a lot of courage to sit down with me right now. After we sat down and spoke.
What country is this in?
This is in the United States.
United States? Wow.
Yes, this is in the United States. At the end of the conversation, after 30 minutes, she had tears in her eyes. And she said, you walked in here and I feared you. You're walking out and I fear for you. We turned a page together.
Right. Yeah, so I guess it's really powerful, and I wanted to have you teach me how it works. What I'm struck with is that I think human nature has always been fearful of the other. Like, you didn't know much about, I don't know, I grew up in Boston, and there was like an Italian section of town,
yeah,
an Irish section of town, and I was in the Italian section of town. You didn't know much about the other sections of town. And you had that same dynamic, right? Like, those people over there are causing trouble or whatever. Yeah. But then we got these powerful tools called social media and internet that they just sort of leverage all of those natural things in a much more exponentially powerful way.
Speed of light.
What's that?
It's at the speed of light. It's transferring at the speed of light.
And so you can turn the page with this woman one at a time. What Millions of Conversations is doing that's really interesting is trying to harness those tools in a more positive way.
We have to do it online as well. It won't work if we only do it offline.
Yeah,
you have to do both. And so that's part of meeting also people where they are. And that includes meeting them with the media that they trust. And so not forcing people to watch the same media that I watch, but also making sure that the content that we're creating to connect together in a positive way is reaching people through sources that they trust. And that's the other thing that's very interesting about this time period in social media is that we're all getting our information from different sources.
Right.
So that's why we have
if you're on the same platform, it's curated differently. I mean, they are curating it based on the cookies and where you've gone before. And so even if we're both on the same one, we're getting a very different experience.
That's right. That's right. So that's why messengers are key. We call it the 5 M's. If you want to have a successful campaign in America today, you have to really focus on 5 key things. One is you have to focus on your message. The message needs to resonate across audiences. You need to have messengers that people trust and can relate to that are talking about those messages. You need to have enough money because you have to be able to place. The media is very expensive. You have to be able to place this information, and because the people who are also that you're countering, who are funding disinformation and fueling misinformation campaigns, many of them are funded by very wealthy individuals. We have to take that into account, along with the fact that in our political season and in our election processes, we have people who have a lot of money behind those elections who are also pushing out those negative messages that we're up against. So we can't do it on a shoestring budget. That's why the 3rd M is money. And the 4th M is management, proper management, making sure you're transparent and above board, and firing on all cylinders that are connecting in effectively. And the 5th is momentum. So whenever you're trying to create social change, whether it be positive or negative, you have to have momentum. And that's where the messenger and the rest fall into place.
And do you see common human values that across culture, across religion, across different stereotypes? Like, I think children and family, I think entrepreneurship, like trying to build up a business and solve a problem, or getting health care for my parents. There may be like things that whatever your background is, you see as valuable.
So we have realized we've been researching this for 2 years, and we focus primarily on what does it mean to be an American today.
Okay.
And what are the 5 common values that cut across all of our differences? And the 5 values that we've identified include the following, and you just mentioned many of them. 1 is family. 2 are jobs, which you said entrepreneurship, but jobs, really, the economy. 3rd is honesty. Americans are frustrated when there's a lack of honesty and transparency, actually. Now, the Americans want that. What's becoming difficult is for people to recognize what's truth and what's fake.
Yeah.
And the 4th is justice and respect for the U.S. Constitution and allegiance to the U.S. Constitution. And the 5th is safety. We've experienced some very violent years these past several years in America, from the 9/11 attacks, terrorist attacks and also the Oklahoma bombings, and Oklahoma City bombings, and then these mass violent shootings that we had was almost every month, and last summer we were seeing it almost every week. Mass shootings happening in different capitals across the country.
Yeah, and it's interesting that those 5 things that are American values, they can be in conflict with each other. Like if I don't have safety, maybe I'm less concerned about justice, right? So like you have to make judgments among them, and probably, for me, family would be number 1, and then I'm excited about justice and the U.S. Constitution, assuming that my family is safe and we have food and health and shelter.
Yeah, no, definitely. But there is an underlying, because I've lived abroad too, and I will say, Americans struggle when we live in a country that doesn't value free speech the same way as we do here. There are certain cultural norms that we feel at our core that we will get very upset about if they're not respected.
Yeah.
That's an American trait.
Yeah.
And that restriction of movement as well. It's one of the reasons why we're all struggling right now with the COVID-19 recommendations, because we're used to having a certain level of freedom of where we get to do what we want. We choose. We have that freedom to choose. There's that freedom. We all talk about American freedom. What is it? What do we mean when we say freedom? I think that at its core, we mean the freedom to choose.
Yeah.
that choice, the freedom to choose the religion.
We don't react well to anyone, a government agency or someone telling us we have to do something. I think we understand in COVID that it is needed for the greater good, but we don't like it. We don't prefer it.
Right. It's hard to enforce, where it's not as hard to enforce in some other countries.
Right. So let's shift to healthcare. So this is the health storm. I have a thesis that is quickly evolving as we're in the COVID outbreak right now. But the idea is that the industry is being disrupted and remade sort of before our eyes. So the established healthcare industry that's been the last 50 years, sort of a mix of nonprofit and for-profit entities delivering health to us. That's going through a pretty massive transition. And it's like a hurricane kind of coming towards our shore. It's going to be somewhat slow moving because it's highly regulated and people's life is at stake, and we need to be cautious. It doesn't move as quickly as other industries that have been disrupted, but there's a disruption that's coming. I think the COVID outbreak is going to catalyze that or accelerate that. For instance, the federal government just waived all the regulation around cross-state licensure around telehealth. And so that used to be a real barrier to implementation, and now that is gone because we need the doctors sort of servicing patients. There's really 4 drivers that I see coming. One is that technology like telehealth, like diagnostics, like wearables are going to really be utilized more to drive better outcomes and more convenience for patients.
Yeah.
I see the rise of the consumer kind of taking control of their own healthcare, looking for brands, looking for trusted entities that they can rely on, kind of in a different way than you would trust your personal doctor, more trying to find a brand that can go with you on all health.
Yeah.
I see care moving out of the hospital and into the neighborhood or the home. And then I see market entry from new players. So
Yeah.
Google, Apple, Amazon, Walmart, companies that were not in healthcare, I think are moving into healthcare. What are your thoughts? I feel like COVID is going to accelerate these, but give me your thoughts in general about the space.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you and, as you know, my partner Amar are much more well-positioned to make predictions in this space than I am. But I would definitely say that something's got to give when it comes to the healthcare industry in the United States, because if there's one thing I think we can all agree on is that it's broken.
Right.
And that if you look at why people are, one of the reasons why, there's a lot of reasons as to why there's a lot of anxiety around COVID-19, but one of them includes fear. And it's fear of death. And it's the fear of the unknown. And we all, most of us, fear dying. And we also want to maximize our lives in the healthiest way possible. And that includes I'm a big believer in a holistic approach to a healthy existence. So a balance between emotional health, mental health, and physical health. And that's, my father had cancer, for example, with stage 4 lymphoma when I was 11 years old. And he was given a 2% chance to live. He beat the odds. He's alive today, thank God. And I am a firm believer that one of the reasons is because of how his health was managed from a emotional, mental, and physical standpoint during that critical time period.
No question, it's all interrelated. There is not clarity on how it's related or how it all works together. And so a lot of physicians, a lot of healthcare professionals struggle with, well, if I don't understand how it all works, I don't know how to do it.
But
it doesn't matter how it works.
I'll give you an example. I'm 34 weeks pregnant right now. I'm going through the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And I am shocked. I have no other word other than to say the silos and the siloed approach to healthcare. And I come from, my sister's a doctor, my parents are doctors, my grandfather's a doctor, my aunt's a doctor. I was on a hospital board for several years. I work at a law firm that has a lot of healthcare legal practitioners. You would think that I wouldn't be struggling as much as I am to understand how my healthcare is being managed. But it is, it's almost that I was saying to somebody the other day, it's almost like it's purposely designed for us not to fully understand it. Because when you don't fully understand something, that's when it's a little bit easier for a few people to take advantage.
Yeah.
And so that's why when I hear your prediction about unconventional players coming in and being more relevant than they have been in the past several decades, that's music to my ears, because it is that kind of competition that we need. Competition is a good thing.
Right.
That is also the American way. Competition is what helps us get honest and transparent results that are fair, that ensure our safety, right? And that protect our families.
It's 20% of the economy, which is $3.5 trillion a year with a T, and it's completely a mess and not managed that well. Now, at the same time, we do have a lot of really talented people, and I mean, right now they're fighting disease in hard times, and so I don't want to pick on the actual people. It's a calling. They went in to care for people in health.
Yeah.
Your family, a bunch of healthcare. My family, there are, and we're in Nashville. I mean, you can walk down the street and everywhere the house is in healthcare. The people are great. The systems and the incentives and the architecture of the industry is not great.
Yeah, we're going to have a systemic shift.
Right.
I'm hopeful. I don't know if COVID-19 will be it. I think it's still too early to tell.
Yeah.
But it might not be one thing. It might be several events. It also is going to come down to, quite frankly, leadership and who we are electing and how we hold them accountable for different decisions that are being made, and the different lobbying efforts and self-interest that are also baked into this whole process, which we know are there. And I think it's the healthcare system is so complicated that it's almost complicated on purpose.
Oh,
and
there's
I
no
think,
question it is. I mean, it has
so I think we all,
up, over 50 years to make money for institutions that are, have shareholders, and they're supposed to make money.
That's right. That's right. So lots of resistance to healthcare for all, obviously. And so what is the happy medium that we can all get behind where that's not politicized? I mean, because we can dream as much as we want to dream, but if it becomes so politicized that they have on the red shirts, they have on the blue shirts. If the blue shirts are for it, I'm against it. If the red shirts are against it, I'm for it. If we continue to get into that, all of this stuff that we think is going to happen probably isn't going to happen. Right. And so I think like a couple.
I try to be apolitical because in my audience I have people with red shirts and blue shirts on.
Yeah, I do too.
I want to be wearing a white shirt, right? Because I want to work with everybody. The thing that I think we can agree on is that everyone should have basic health care, partially because it's a human right, partially because it makes financial sense. Like I want to do preventative things because they're much less expensive, period.
Yeah.
And they're better for the people. And certainly we need to design this in a way that we can pay for it in a sustainable way. It is meaningful, and
the payment models are going to have to change.
What's that?
The payment models need to change, and they need to be predictable. People aren't doing well when they get slapped with a very large bill that they didn't know was coming and they didn't fully understand, because when they're showing up to the hospital, they're trying to manage their own crisis at that moment.
Right.
And so I think we need to be smarter about how we're managing the healthcare system. We need to let more people in, as you're saying. I think that we need to use technology in more innovative ways. We need to scale technological advancements. We need to be thinking about how we're scaling them. And so what's also surprised me is how siloed we are. In the one city we'll be doing this, and even watching how COVID-19 is being managed. Denver, Colorado is doing one thing. Nashville, Tennessee is doing something else. Boston, Massachusetts is doing something else. Can we figure out a way to coordinate best practices, and that includes how we use technology?
Yeah, there's no question. And so I think it's encouraging to see small changes happening. We're sort of in the middle of the crisis mode right now with COVID, where we're just trying to treat people. But I think there's going to be a recovery from this eventually once it wanes, and then there'll be kind of I'm calling it a new normal, where we take those lessons and we learn from doing all the work we did in the really critical time, and then we can apply it to the normal day to day.
Well, I want to be optimistic and say that we will do that. I hope that we do that. I hope that what we don't do is forget all these lessons that we've learned right now. And like it be a moment in time.
Right.
So as we have, in order for us to benefit from an opportunity, and an opportunity being lessons learned and best practices to be shared and carried forward, we have to actually seize that opportunity.
Right.
Otherwise, it's a lost opportunity.
Right. Yeah, and I think I'm going to be optimistic too. I think we will in most ways. There probably won't be I'm a VC and an innovator and sort of a change agent. I probably won't get all the things that I'm looking for, but I think we'll get several of them put in place. So.
Yeah, I'm hopeful, especially for the rural areas too. I mean, I think telemedicine's great. I think it can only step in and do so much.
Yeah.
And there, it can do a lot, but then you need to know when you need to go to the hospital, and then you need to be able to get into the hospital.
Right.
You need to be able to access the healthcare at the hospital with a healthcare professional who is understanding, who's not so super specialized to the point of where they also aren't thinking about the other things that might be going wrong with you, or what needs to be prioritized given your different list of health considerations. And so I also think we need a balance between hyper specialized practitioners and physicians and generalists.
Yeah, I think there's going to be an ascent of the generalist primary care physician.
Yes.
Where they are today.
And concierge medicine.
Yeah.
Too.
Right.
I think we're going to see an uptick in. I think in the next 10 years, we're definitely. It's an area that I'm been hyper focused on lately. Is the is how concierge medicine works in the United States today.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears because I'm really interested in get your opinion about kind of how the world is shaking out between kind of the global expert-based association groups. So the World Economic Forum you mentioned, the UN, the World Health Organization, IMF. There are groups that are multinational, usually that have expert or specialization in one or more areas that try to be not that political or above any nationalistic thing and good for the globe. And then there's also, I think, a trend towards populism and nationalistic themes with this kind of global pandemic. I'm interested in your thoughts of, which way is it going to break? Like, I could see either way. I'd like us to rely on the experts and all come together as humankind and try to fight this. But I'm not sure that I'm seeing that. I'm seeing more walls erecting and don't travel to my country.
Yeah. I think it depends. What I'm seeing is it depends on which audience you belong to. And so.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it gets to what sources do you trust? Which leaders do you trust? What information sounds rational to you? How do you receive information? How have you experienced the world? How have you been exposed to these different conglomerates? Like, for example, in full disclosure, right? I've worked very closely with the United Nations, and I also am a member of the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. It would be natural for me to trust that institution because it's not abstract to me. For many people, that institution is very abstract. It's also, for many people, they would consider it to be, it's not accessible, even though we want it to be. And so that's why I'm saying, the experience that you live in the world, our experiences based on a whole number of different things are becoming vastly different.
Well, maybe that's true. I think that there are facts and things that are true and not true. And yes, they're interpreted differently.
Yeah.
But I think that COVID-19 is going to be a really damaging, dangerous. Lots of people are going to be sick, and many people will die. And sharing information through some kind of global health body is in the absolute a positive thing. Now,
I agree. I mean, I completely agree. And you and I will agree on that. But you and I belong to the same audience. And but we do, right? I mean, so we both went to Vanderbilt, and just a kind of it's just certain types of experiences. We both have traveled a lot. We both engaged in the world in a global fashion. We both believe in institutions. We both have experienced the benefit of functioning institutions and collaboration, and shared best practices between countries. Not for a lot of people, it's simply, I'm losing my job. I don't have access to health care. I'm fearful. And I need somebody to just tell me. I need somebody to tell me what to do, and is it going to be okay, and is it going to be all right, and to be fighting for me and my interests. And populism and populist leaders that thrive and create these populist movements provide that stability in messaging, through messaging.
Right. So I understand that. And sure, I will agree we're from the same side of the argument. But I can't help but say that we had World War II.
Yeah.
That was a world war, and a lot of people died.
Yeah.
And after that, I think we said we need to try to move away from single country, the guy with the biggest gun is going to protect me. And that's a net good thing. It just is a good thing for my
opinion. In mediation, we call it, we shift from negative norms that lead to authorizing environments for cruelty to positive norms that help bring people together, which is what we're trying to do at Millions of Conversations.
So that's a better way to say it. Like, let's get to positive norms, whether it is the World Health Organization or some new group.
The messenger matters. So the World Health Organization, in my opinion, can't be who's speaking to people who are susceptible to populist messaging. That it has to be messaged in a way that is relatable to people who might not necessarily trust the World Health Organization for a whole host of reasons and experiences that we might not fully understand, but we know is there.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of criticisms on WHO. I mean, they're not a perfect organization, but we need some group to help, forget the United States. Tennessee, where I live, I want fewer people to die from the disease here. Yeah. And so scientists can share information across some platform globally. I think that would lead to fewer deaths.
Well, and I'm going to say, I agree, and I'm going to say something controversial here, and that is this. I think goes back to United States of America, and that is we have to, as right this moment, as how we are seeing the trends. New York City and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Seattle and Detroit, a couple of the other urban environments in the country, and Chicago and Baltimore, are going to be the hardest hit.
Yeah, but it's going to go to Florida and Houston. It's going to flow around.
Miami, but the rural areas,
not northern Florida.
The rural areas need to care about the deaths in the urban centers as much as the urban centers need to care about the deaths in the rural areas. We have to get there.
Yeah. And you don't think we're there now.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that, I'm not saying that people don't care that people die, but I'm a little bit worried about people saying, well, because I'm listening to the rhetoric constantly on a daily basis, as we all are. And there is a shift in rhetoric of talking about where the deaths are and in urban versus rural environments. So and that rhetoric has been, and in general, urban versus rural has been intensifying for the past 20 years.
Yeah, but don't you think that there's an absolute truth that's just different and higher than these relative truths that might be sort of positioned to certain population groups? Like, if all of the big cities in the U.S. die or have major deaths, the rural populations are going to be dramatically suffering because it's going to, whether they get COVID-19 or not, it's all intertwined.
Yeah, it is intertwined, but it's difficult sometimes to explain how it is intertwined. Again, I'm hopeful we'll get there. I'm hopeful, but this gets to leadership and it gets to messaging. That's in this new era that we're living in, new normal also being in the social media space.
Right.
How it's messaged and how it's communicated and how the suffering is communicated is critical to the understanding as to how the dots are connected.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I don't want to ask this. I'm going to shift. I was going to ask if you were optimistic. I'm going to ask a different question. What should we be doing to move it in the right direction?
You mean COVID-19 or?
Just the COVID-19 and how it's positioned and how the rural population cares about the urban population and vice versa.
Yeah. I think human stories. I think storytelling is very powerful. It sounds basic.
Yeah.
It works. And I think that messengers that people can relate to, with messages that people can relate to and understand and feel and empathize with, going back to that key word, empathy.
Yeah.
How we do that and is because I do believe optimistically that humans are by nature good. Some people disagree with me on that, but I wouldn't be a mediator. I wouldn't be somebody who's dedicated her career to bridging divides if I didn't believe in humanity. And so I do believe that people want to get to positivity, and they want to feel, and they want to care, and they want to love.
Yeah, and it's more like ignorance or a lack of understanding ends up with them not understanding and seeing the other and then going down that trajectory of fear. I don't know exactly what it was, but fear and hate.
I mean, we've seen a lot of xenophobia against the Asian American community in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Because of how we've been talking about the virus. And so and that's unacceptable. That's, in my opinion, that's un-American. And so I think we also have to have a duty to hold our government accountable for how they're managing this crisis. And that gets to people will say, well, if you criticize the White House for anything, then you're anti-Trump. Well, not necessarily. It's actually, you're being a good citizen. Yep. And that's what it is. Right. And when you're praising the White House, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're pro-Trump right now. And so we have to do our part in our job. And I think as citizens, and in order to do that, we have to be informed. In order to be informed, we have to relate, and we have to trust the information that we're getting. And that's going to get to who are the messengers and what's the message. Is the average person in a rural area right now relating to Governor Cuomo? I'm not sure. Can they relate to somebody who's living in a rural area in upstate New York that has COVID-19 right now and wants to send a message to somebody who's living in a rural area in Tennessee about the steps that they wish had been taken beforehand? That would probably be very effective.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I mean, what I was thinking about as you were talking about that is that the format or the way that this messaging is sent out is really important. Otherwise, people tune out and they don't listen. And that's kind of what we mean, right? Like Governor Cuomo is trying to say things, but if it doesn't resonate, they just miss it.
Right. So it doesn't resonate, and I don't trust it.
Yeah.
I mean, trust is key. Trust is one of the key elements to how you transcend divides. And by transcending divides, let me just sort of like use a more easy term, which is you just bridge divides, you build bridges, you bring people together around common values that they relate to, that makes them feel a sense of belonging to the community. So that's what it is. Like belonging to a community means you care about your other community member.
Yeah, and do we have a community in the United States?
Succeed.
Are we united together as the United States?
Right.
As one people, or not? And
right. When I see shirts, when I see people wearing shirts that say "I would rather be Russian than a Democrat," I step back.
I've never seen that shirt. That's crazy.
And I say, "Whoa, that's not very. It's just not very American to wear that."
Right.
And I don't want to also embrace jingoism either. There has to be a healthy balance with your pride and your relationship to your country. But if you're, but if we are going to be American, we are going to be Americans, and we are going to work together, and we are going to be one country, we have to agree on a couple of key core values that binds us together, in my opinion. We don't all have to dress the same. We don't have to all talk the same. We don't have to agree on everything. But we do need to agree on a couple of key core values. Otherwise, what are we? And otherwise, how do we actually exist in a functional manner?
Yeah. And are those the values you were talking about earlier? About
yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I think that those are part of the values that I'm talking about. As it gets to the U.S. Constitution, I mean, a lot of what I do is I talk to, as you do too, I talk to a lot of people on both sides of the political aisle. And the people on both sides of the political aisle themselves are very diverse, and they're also very diverse in their own ideologies as well. But the one thing that people do seem to respect is the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And there is still enough respect, I would say, for the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, and wanting to see them function effectively. There's a lot of disagreement as to whether or not they are functioning effectively right now, but both sides can agree that it's important for them to function effectively.
Right. Yeah, and so those values can be built on to where we have a community in the United States that we all feel part of. And even though I might disagree with you on one particular issue, we share these values, and at the end of the day, we're Americans.
Right. And I'm not going to demonize you to the point of where I hate you. I can't, this vitriol that we're seeing, this being disseminated across our social media channels right now, that's creating all of this anxiety, fear, hate, violence. It's not healthy. We can't keep going there. We have to reverse. We have to flip the switch. We have to flip the script, because we are becoming our own worst enemy.
Yeah, and I think there's a chance that COVID could be a time when we come together and say, like,
I agree.
If it's the message and the messenger are redone and
That's why we also need to have people who are not necessarily in political positions and who aren't necessarily burdened with an enormous amount of different self-interests to be the ones who are connecting and who are reaching out and giving them that platform. And that's one of the things what we've been doing in Millions of Conversations. We have an ambassadors program. We have a conversationalist program. We're starting up university chapters. And one of the things that the ambassadors, that Millions Ambassadors do, is that they are people that we know are not everyday names that you would have heard of, but are really good at connecting with people online and offline. And conversationalists are people who are really good at connecting with people and building bridges through dialogue offline. And this is the other thing too, that what we see is that people are stuck in cycles of trauma as well. So they're triggered by certain words. Certain words trigger people. And this has been focus grouped. And we know this through elections. I mean, the election language that is used in the election time period, because there's enough funding, it's so focus group.
Using it to trigger people to have the reaction they want.
Exactly.
Okay, well, is there a platform that you see that we should do to try to get people to share their COVID experience with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think we have right now we have to use Facebook. I think YouTube. I think obviously Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, and also then local radio stations. Yes, broadcast media as well, print op-eds in local, rural, and urban newspapers, both. I think there's a lot of different ways right now to get the stories out, but we need to do it across the board. And then not just sharing it on your Facebook page, but making sure it's shared with asking people who are social influencers in circles that you might not be in, but a few people who are in them, asking them to share that content and for them to share that information, because family and friends right now are the most trusted sources for information. And then, if there's time, and if you get a story on CNN, or if you get a story on MSNBC or on Fox, then great. But, you don't necessarily have to land on a major platform like that in order for the story to.
Well, I like the idea of a kind of a grassroots campaign where there are thousands of people sharing their fears about this or their experience about this. And we should start it right now. You and me can just start it right now. Yeah.
No, definitely. I'm in.
Okay, cool. So I want to shift to having you teach me and teach the audience about Syria. I mean, the refugee crisis has been going on just over 9 years. It's 9 years of crisis.
Yeah.
And I know you've been very involved in that. It's very complicated, so we don't have that much time. But how should people think about that? Where should they go to learn about it? How would you explain it to folks that just haven't focused on it?
Yeah. Now, I'll start with this. Syria is, for me, a very hard subject for both personal and professional reasons. It is heartbreaking. I was working at the White House as a White House fellow when the Syrian conflict started in March of 2011. And as I was telling you, it's been 9 years and 1 week, almost to the day. Personally, my mother is Syrian. She's from Damascus, Syria. She's proudly Syrian American. I have worked with a number of people, some who who are working on trying to reach a peace agreement, some who survived, and some who did not. I know I have a lot of friends who've had family members who've disappeared, who've been taken and or killed, and so it's sobering and it's very real for me. Professionally, it's difficult because I feel that the world failed Syria. I feel that we were not successful in our efforts to end the Syrian conflict.
People that you were in meetings with and working to try to solve this died.
Yeah. And somebody told me the other day, they were asking me about this, that you're very matter of fact about it. And there's a lot of, this is something that I will always be troubled by. This is not, something this is the kind of trauma that you're always constantly managing, that you've been exposed to for a whole host of reasons. And people react in different ways. And I oftentimes tell people, it's nobody's place to judge someone else's grief. And that's another thing, is that I think that we all in different ways for different reasons are grieving. The Syrian conflict itself has, unfortunately, there's the largest refugee crisis of our time has come out of that conflict. And in my personal opinion, in my professional opinion as well, the Syrian conflict could have ended several years ago. It was a failure in global leadership. And by global leadership, I mean there has, over the past several years, there has been a failure to build consensus across major powers around the world who have interests inside of Syria. We call it the Syrian civil war. In my opinion, it's become a proxy war. that evolved out of a civil war, of people who initially were standing up to a ruthless dictator and saying, no more, we want a different tomorrow for ourselves and for our children. Enough is enough. We didn't want to be occupied 100 years ago, and we don't want to be occupied by somebody who is a dictator today who simply shares our ethnicity and so therefore doesn't view it as an occupation. And people were wanting what we have. They wanted democracy. They were calling for democracy. Initially, that's what they were asking for. And the economy in certain areas in Syria were collapsing, and they were tired of the corruption. And they were tired of not having they were tired of not having choice. They wanted choice. It's what human beings normally want, is choice. And they want their rights to be respected, and they want their family to have a better tomorrow and a good today. And they want to be safe.
Everything that we take for granted.
That's right. That's what people were taking the risk for, and that's what they wanted. And it turned in, what I say, the Arab Spring turned into the Arab nightmare. Some people will say it turned into the Arab winter. For those who like four seasons, I'm not going to insult winter. Nobody likes nightmares. I'm going to say it turns in from the Arab dream to the Arab nightmare. And for people who really want to understand it, I would just simply, and what they can do, I would say this today. We are quick to punish. And after World War II, we talked about World War II a lot in this conversation today, we had the Nuremberg trials. We all know about the Nuremberg trials. What we also had was the Marshall Plan. Where is the Marshall Plan for Syria?
Yeah.
The Syrians deserve a Marshall Plan. They're getting the Nuremberg trials through sanctions. We are sanctioning Syria, and we are sanctioning Syrians left, right, and center. And the EU is doing the same thing, and we're doing it because horrific things took place over the past 9 years, and there needs to be there needs to be justice served for that. There absolutely does, but it needs to be done in such a way that doesn't cripple the country further for the next 10 years. There needs to be an economic plan.
There's no plan forward.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's very easy to sanction. And so sanctioning without an economic plan, for me, is not a plan. Mm-hmm. That doesn't produce justice. That keeps people in chains. And so, and it serves certain political interests that makes you feel good because you're sanctioning someone who did bad things. You're sanctioning a country that has done bad things. Yes, but do you think that's going to stop the brutality from happening?
Right.
That's not the solution.
And it's a significant number of people. I mean, there's 10, 12 million people that are still refugees.
Right. How are the sanctions going to help them?
Right.
So you have taken a moral position against brutality. Thank you very much. That's great. That's fantastic. It still doesn't put food on the table for the Syrian person, for the Syrian individual.
And you think it is an absence of leadership in Europe, in the U.S., in anywhere that is
Middle East too, in the Gulf countries as well.
Yeah.
And I think that and we've seen the same thing in Yemen as well. And I've talked to a number of people who say, it's not my responsibility. If it's nobody's responsibility, then it's everybody's responsibility. If you can't identify whose responsibility it is, then it's all of ours. And I think that if you want to go at it from a self-interested standpoint, simply put, people radicalize and become extremists for different reasons. Some of those are because of economic distress. We saw this in Afghanistan. We saw this in Afghanistan for decades. We don't want another Afghanistan situation of a failed state. We can't afford that globally. And so, but there's so many different political interests that are mixed into this, combined with the fact that you do have a ruthless, brutal dictator who's a war criminal and Bashar al-Assad, who's been the president, and his father was the president of Syria before that. But I would also say, in a situation like this, the world does want to know, and the Syrian people want to know, if you no longer have Assad as the president of Syria, who is going to fill that vacuum?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we took out the government in Iraq.
Yeah.
There was no real organization that put a strong government in for a long
right.
time. So,
right. So, and what are the institutions that are
if people have heard this and they want to learn more in a forum that is reasonably balanced, or it would be good, where should they look? Where's a good place to start?
Yeah, it's a good question. There honestly isn't that much out there right now. I would to be very there's a. I would probably start. I would probably.
All these people are there, and there's no news. There's no information on it.
Sorry.
It's kind of sad that there's not a lot of resources.
For a whole number of reasons. I would say one would be the BBC, would be the British Broadcasting Company. That would be probably the best. They've done a really good job both on their website and through different shows of covering Syria over the past 10 years, over the past 9 years, that I think has been balanced.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for doing this. Can we end on a couple lighter notes, just to sort of not have it be so hard? So you've been working on a variety of things for 10, 15 years in law, in entrepreneurship, in mediating conflict. What I'm interested in is what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started this career?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is how power dynamics work. I think I was pretty naive.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty naive in terms of just sort of thinking like if you just do your work and you put your head down and it's a meritocracy that you can be effective, particularly if what you're trying to do is be a change maker in the world. But there are existing power dynamics and structures that we all have to manage and we all have to deal with if we want to move things forward. As we spoke about earlier with regards to healthcare and the healthcare system in America. So understanding how to navigate that effectively and with integrity is something that I think is a worthwhile skill that I have been working to develop over time and understand.
Yeah, and the first piece is to understand how the existing power structure works today.
Yeah.
As you can't navigate it if you don't know where the rocks are and where the channel is and how to go through.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so I guess what you're saying is 10, 15 years ago, you didn't worry about that and just like tried to sail through where you could study it more and try to navigate it better. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And like if you're trying to get from point A to point B and you want to reach point B, you have to understand how point A works. And so I mean I can be the greatest lawyer in the world in terms of I can be the greatest entrepreneur, whatever it is, in terms of the product that I put out. But if I don't know how to market it correctly and I don't know how to secure funding for it, and funding comes many times from power structures and people in powerful positions.
The existing infrastructure that you're going to sell into, all these pieces that you need to understand in order to get from point A to point B.
That's right. Right. Yeah. And that interdisciplinary approach. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I have done so many different things, in part is because I realized that in order to be effective in this time period that we're in, you really actually do need to have your foot in an understanding and experience and your foot in a number of different disciplines in order to push change forward.
Right. And kind of understand that perspective from doing the job for a little while, and then you can go back and interact with them.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't trade my government experience for anything. I learned so much from how the government works to how the government doesn't work.
Right.
And if you want to make change within the government that's helpful for people systematically, how do you actually do that so that it's effective rather than it's just not a, lots of people have great ideas. Few people actually see them through.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to say, I mean, I always talk about entrepreneurs on Sunday night around the barbecue. It's really easy to talk about the thing you could invent if you quit your job and just did it. But it's very different when you actually quit your job and are there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and have no pay and no real idea, and the product doesn't work like you think it's going to work. And it's just much harder to execute all the way to completion.
Yeah. Yeah. And there'll be a lot of people along the way that'll tell you that you're crazy or they don't really understand you, or, like, especially when you're seeing things a little bit differently. And I think like that's the other thing is just kind of like believing in yourself and believing in your convictions but being willing to change and not being so hard-headed when you are wrong to admit that you're wrong.
And knowing the difference is what's hard, right? Like if you're an entrepreneur or you're a change agent in government or you're trying to do something globally that's not well known, some people are going to be naysayers that you should ignore because they don't understand. And some people are going to appear like naysayers, but they have a lot of good knowledge that you should incorporate and change your idea.
That's right.
How do you
and
know
being able to make that being able to make that judgment call and see, and a lot of it's like, where are people coming from and what have their sets of experiences been to date, in order to like, do they really have, like if somebody comes in and asks me about where they should go for the residency program as a medical student, I am not the right person to listen to. You know what I mean? Like, not it. And so, but I've seen people give advice as if they are, and they take somebody down the wrong road. And so just kind of being able to see that, know that, and I have different mentors for different areas. And I always go to my mentors before I make a decision, before I make a major decision. Yeah. I'm constantly in contact with them. One of my mentors in South Africa, I'm in contact with several times a week. I view my profession as an apprenticeship. And I will always be learning, and I will always be working on to get better and to also admit my mistakes and understand why I've made mistakes. I think that's the other thing. We're getting into this environment now, or we are in this environment now, which we call the cancel culture, which doesn't allow for people to make mistakes. I think that's really dangerous. Yeah. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes, and we're probably going to make more mistakes than we actually get it right.
The key is not making mistakes. It's making mistakes and learning from them and doing better the next time and not giving up and continuing.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, and I'm learning to do this now, is being a good manager, and understanding how to manage and to scale ideas too. So you can have a good idea that you actually do see through, but then how do you scale it? And that takes a team effort, and working with teams takes management. And I also have learned the art of saying, I'm sorry. And acknowledging when I keep going back to the mistakes, but like acknowledging when I've messed up, when I've made a bad call. If I made a bad call, which I do, and then I try to run it into the ground that I'm right on that bad call.
Right.
It's just, it wastes time.
That's demotivating to the team. Right. Yeah.
No, you lose respect, and you lose focus, and it's ego driven. That's when it's really, truly ego driven. So also, if I have advice for people, just in general, because we're human beings, manage the ego. Manage your own ego first.
Right.
If somebody's trying to manage your ego, it's a sign that you're not doing your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. Good. Well, Samar, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Exciting times, scary times, interesting times, I guess.
Yeah. And let me know how I can be helpful in the storytelling piece we're going to start.